Hello, Sanxion here. Welcome to episode 1 of Rave Recreations. In these videos we're going to talk about some old tracks and try to deconstruct them and figure out how they were made. Sometimes we'll get really close, other times we might not get so close, and sometimes we'll talk about the broad strokes of the track, but other times we might start digging in and really talking about the minutiae of the track. But here we go, episode 1, we're going to talk about Last Rhythm by Last Rhythm. It's one of my favourite kind of Italian techno tracks from that era. It came out in 1990. I assume it's probably produced in 1989. But if you don't know the track, pause the video now, go listen to it. It's brilliant. Like I say, one of my favourites. So let's get into it, shall we? Let's start deconstructing what goes on in Last Rhythm. I think the first thing we'll talk about is the lead sound. It's really specific to this track, and if you don't know what it sounds like, I will play you. I've done a little bit of preparation beforehand, so I'll play you what I created. So there we go, that is the main hook from the track, and if we open up the synth that I made it on, it's silent, and it's a fairly simple patch when we start looking at it. It's 4 oscillators, so I'm using both part A and part B. Well, let's talk about part A first. We've got one voice on oscillator 1, we've also got one voice on oscillator 2, but we're playing 7 semitones up, and part B we're playing 4 semitones up, and we're going down -3 semitones on there, and all 4 oscillators are saw waves, and nothing really exciting going on there. There's like no attack, a little bit of release, sustain so that when we hold the note it holds, and in theory what's going on there, if we just load up a blank silent, it's just playing a chord. So if you look at the keyboard down the bottom of silent there, because of how the riff goes, especially later in the track, which we'll get to, I do believe that they probably created it like this with the semitones playing on different oscillators. If we go back to our main one. And on the channel, all I've done there is a little bit of EQ to scoop out some of the mid-range to make it slightly less harsh, and cut off the bottom. Got a little bit of reverb going on. There's a convolution reverb that comes with Cubase. And it's just kind of a kind of fairly wet hall reverb, and not really doing too much, really, not even cutting off the low end, it's just kind of reverb. And a little bit of mono delay. If we look at the settings on that, really just sort of subtle in the mix on a 1/4 of a bar to every beat. Quite high feedback, but cutting off pretty much all the bottom end and some of the top end as well. I think that sounds quite close to the actual track. The reason I thought that they probably did it using oscillators rather than playing chords is there's a section in the middle 8, like some middle 8 section of the track, and it does some sort of mad bit of riffage like this. And it goes into the middle 8. And the MIDI for this, it's not too sort of mad, but I can't imagine that they played 4-finger chords in that way. It feels more like they used it as a stab. They could have even recorded a chord and played it back in a sampler. That's also possible. Also, when that riff is going, there's also a bass line in the track. So we go back to our main section, main riff section, and the bass sound is sort of like a fake bass guitar sound, and I found a kind of similar thing here in the Roland JV, which is called finger bass. It sounds like this on its own. It's actually a little bit shorter than the bass in the track, and we could go in and that's the wrong button. We could go in and start editing this sound. If I can remember where the edit button is, it'd be dangerous. Sorry, it's right there. It says edit by. I can't believe I missed it. We could go in and we could tweak the sort of sustain and delay, but it's kind of close enough for now. We play that together with the lead. And the MIDI for that is on screen there. And it's a fairly simple pattern. It's kind of just filling up the gaps between the riff. And one of the reasons I really like this track is it's quite sort of chilled out and laid back. And part of the reason for that is rather than using the 909 for drums, as a lot of tracks in that era did, it's using the 808. And it's a fairly simple pattern. It's just punchy little kick drum and some techno style hi-hats. And then they do some cool stuff with the 808 snare to make it sound almost like a breakbeat in the background, but not quite. So when we play those two sections together, the line, the bass, and the drums, we get this. Well, we're starting to sound quite close now. But there is another layer on top of that, and it's a synth pad. And again, it's a fairly simple sound that I found. Well, it's a sound from Retrolog, which again is a built-in plugin that comes with Cubase. So nothing too nonsensy, and it's just really a saw wave kind of string. Again, it's nothing too exciting, and all it's doing is following the chords of the riff. So if we look at the MIDI for that I've recreated already, and listen to that all together. Well, let's start on its own first. And they probably would have got that over an M1 or even a JV or something of that era. But I think when all those sections are playing together, that sounds quite close to my ears. And the next big thing we need to talk about is the top line. And again, it's a very specific sound, but to my ears, it sounds a little bit like either a flute or a clarinet or something similar to that, but not a real flute or a real clarinet, like a really terrible, like late 80s, early 90s synth recreation of a flute or a clarinet. So again, I delved into the JV and I found this clarinet sound, which actually sounds like a clarinet, but as you start playing it higher up and doing the cool stuff that this lead line does, starts taking on the characteristics of the thing in the track. So here's the MIDI for that. You can see got some pitch bend action going on here, but when we play that on its own, sounds like this. So basically, we've got this clarinet sound, which sounds very clarinety, but we're playing it 2 octaves higher, so it's almost like a flute, but almost like a synth sound as well. When we play all that section together. Oh, we've lost our lead sound. There we go. And again, it's not exactly the same, but we're getting close to how the original sounded. And the next thing I want to talk about is the intro. And there's some really cool stuff going on in the intro. I'll try to recreate this as much as I can. This is the part that I think probably sounds least like the original track, but we're pretty close, I think. So the first thing to know is it's got some cool congas and bongos in the intro. And what I've done here is I've got a conga sound out of a TR-727 and loaded it into Contact so we can pitch it around the keyboard. And done a little pattern that sounds like this. And you're thinking that sounds nothing like the original track. But got this other layer here, and we look at what that is. This is a bongo from a 727. It's not actually a bongo, it sounds just like a pitch down conga. But when we add this pattern to the pattern we made before, all of a sudden that starts sounding like the original track. So what I did was I bounced those down, put them on their own channel, and recreated the rhythm that happens in the intro on the track. Did a little bit of boost in there, cut some of the bottom end off, some reverb that we talked about before, another mono delay, but a little bit more mixed than before, but very similar to the one we've got on the sound. And we end up with this. Which is really cool and quite close to what's going on in the original track. There's also, throughout the whole of the intro, a sort of low bass kind of pad sound, and I use Serum here to make a similar sort of sound. It's quite a resonant sort of pad, saw wave pad, but playing it quite low on the keyboard and you get that kind of feel. So when we play that with our bongos and congas, and then after the first 8 bars, there is this kind of, it sounds again like some sort of bongo, conga kind of thing. The closest I can find is I sampled out the clave out of the 808 and put it into a sampler. And we end up with this. So basically I just sampled the clave sound out of the 808, which is here, put it into a sampler, pitched it down, roughly figured out what the notes were, and it's just basically doing octaves up and down at that rhythm. And then when we play that with the 2 sections we just talked about before, but when you go back to the track, there's definitely something else going on. So what I did as well as a layer is I got this cool bit of percussion from a Vengeance sound pack, which is kind of like, again, a bongo kind of conga thing, and pitched it around, and it just gives this 808 clave a little bit more body that it didn't have before. So here's the 808 on its own, and then with the percussion, and then with all our other sections. There we go. So far so good. And then 8 bars later, we come in with kind of a plinky kind of pluck sound over the top, and this is what I came up with. Again, it's not exactly the same, but it's kind of close, and the MIDI is really simple. And we'll look at that sound now. I made this in Serum, and it's using one of the built-in wavetables, which is analog MSAW, which kind of, as you move through the wavetable, it goes from like almost like a sine wavy thing to almost like a triangle wave. No, I don't know what that is. It's got some sort of saw wave characteristics. But way down this end, with a little bit of attack, quite a short ish decay, and some effects. We've got messing with this hyperdimension thing just ever so slightly to widen the sound, a little bit of delay, bit of EQ, bit of compression, reverb at the end, and we end up with that sound. And when we play that with our intro sections so far, we get this. But we're not done. 8 bars later on the intro, another layer comes up, and it's a very similar sound. In fact, it probably is the same sound as this plink. I've just made a slightly different sound, based on roughly the same sound, which is a slightly different place in the wavetable, and obviously playing the different line. I've got slightly different effects on it as well, but nothing major. And we play those together. There's a little bit of a click on that sound. We could probably tweak the release to get rid of some of that. There we go. So now when we play all our intro sections together, and that's kind of it, really. Like I say, later on in the track, it does this mad little middle 8-bit. And then you sit there for a few hours and make an arrangement the same as Last Rhythm, and you've got a pretty cool recreation of Last Rhythm, I think. So there you go. Fairly simple track to break down, but lots of things going on. Hopefully you found it interesting. If you do, hit like, hit subscribe and all that. And until next time, see ya.